Okay.
Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York, 16th of February 2005, approximately 1:30 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Well, my full name is Hans Keller. I don't have a middle initial, which gives me problems sometimes. My date of birth is May 28th, 1921. And my place of birth is Berlin, Germany.
Okay. When did your family immigrate to the United States?
My father came to the United States in 1926. I don't remember the month.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mother and I came over in September of 1929.
Okay. You said your father was a veteran of the German Army?
Yes, he
World
was.
War I?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why did your family come over, do you know?
Well, there was a tremendous depression after World War I. And so my father decided to emigrate to the United States because things were really bad in Germany at that time. I guess that's a standard story of the immigration today.
Mm-hmm.
We researched some records, and this is how I know that he was supposed to have gone to Chicago, but somehow he ended up in New York City, and his first job was a short order cook in New York somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow he found out he was a machinist by trade, tool and die maker by trade. So somehow he found out that General Electric Company in Schenectady were looking for people like that. So he finally came to Schenectady and got a job with General Electric as a tool and die maker. And then 2 years after that, in 1929, my mother and I came over.
How old were you at that point?
I was 8 years old at that time, yeah.
Now, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
Well, I started at RPI, and I was there about a year. And it was at the time that the war broke out, actually in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And General Electric was in dire need of people, and they were paying good wages, or looking for people. And of course, my background at that time at RPI was electrical engineering. And GE started, in a research lab, started a group of grinding crystals for communications equipment. And so there was about 10 of us that started a group, Building 37 in Schenectady, grinding crystals for communication, mostly aircraft transmitting equipment. And this later expanded, and a big crystal lab manufacturing was done in Campbell Avenue plant in Schenectady. But as time progressed, all my friends and everybody I knew, and you know, you're 20 years old, 21 years old, you were itching to do something. And I found out there was a program called the EDDI program, which was a program which was training for the latest electronic equipment, which was radar at the time. That was the, that was the latest technology at the time. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to get into that program, and General Electric wouldn't release me because we had a 6-month deferment at that time. And matter of fact, they told me that I'd have another deferment coming up. In other words, there was a problem of who they wanted. They needed my services. General Electric needed them. But anyway, so I took all the examination, took the physical, and was all set to go in the Navy, but I couldn't go in because GE wouldn't release me. Well, the next deferment came up, and it didn't go through, and I was drafted. So I ended up in Albany, walking around nude, as everybody else was, being a drafting, And I always remember one funny thing that I was told from one guy, from one doctor, to go see the Rear Admiral. Well, the Rear Admiral was a rectal inspection. But anyway, you know, when you're that old, you're sort of shy. You're not very aggressive. But for some reason or other, at the end of my exam, this was in Albany Armory, the final question was, what do you want to go into? Marines, Army, Navy? Oh, I want to go to Navy, because that's what I wanted to do. Well, he stamped U.S. Army. We get too many guys in the Navy. So I was really determined at the time. I looked around and I saw a Navy commander sitting up, and they always like elevated so they can look down. And I finally got enough guts to go and talk to him. And I said to him that I enlisted in the Eddie program and I wanted to get in the Navy. And he said, they got me in the Army. He said, give me those papers, go through the line again. He says, and then you come and see me. Well, that's how I got into the Navy. Well, the Navy sent me to...
Could I stop you a second
Yeah.
and go back with a question? Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I felt... well, I felt really with disbelief.
Where were you when you heard about this? Do you recall?
Well, I think I was going to school.
Mhm.
And, of course, the attitude was, you know, everybody wanted to join the service. I mean, it was not like today. I mean, the getting in the service and it was a tremendous thing. Everybody joined up. It was really disbelief. I had highly respect for Roosevelt. And matter of fact, well, that's the only thing I can say is disbelief.
Were your parents aware of what was going on in Germany?
Oh yes, oh yes. Well, no, they were not in Germany. They were here.
Well, I
Yeah.
know that, but were they? Do they have family members that were still there, and were
Yeah,
they
well,
aware at all?
Yeah,
or-
yeah. I don't know what their reaction was. I really don't, because at that time they were already at war. I think.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And I do know, like my cousin, which came over later, and my grandmother came over before the war. My father, which was my mother's mother, he arranged that she come over, and she was a sweet old lady. She actually had a lot of efforts to raise me. I lived with her for a while. And of course the German word for grandmother is Oma. And so we came over, she came over. She never really learned English. In retrospect, my German father, you know, I think the second day I was here in Schenectady, I went to school, Draper School. And the teacher said, well, suggested that maybe I stay home a couple of weeks, pick up a few words. Put them in school, put them in school. And I think this is one of the reasons. I don't think I have an accent. And some friends of mine who came over at the same age still have a slight accent. But I learned English pretty fast. And there were no Germans around the area in Draper Avenue where we lived, so that was a plus. Both my parents spoke English with an accent, but spoke very well English.
Okay, after you were drafted or went into the Navy, where did you go for your basic training?
Sampson.
Okay.
And that was an experience. And
In what way?
well, one of the reasons you learn how to gold break. You had to be an expert at a gold break. When you're marching to work, you always fell out to go see the dentist or you go see somebody else that you didn't have to really go to, but you got out of work. But they'd catch on sooner or later. They were usually pretty smarter than you think they were. And
Now, what year was that?
that was 40, I believe it was 45 or 44. 45, maybe.
Okay, so you went in late?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I had this deferment with John Electric
Right.
Company.
Okay.
But from there we went to Michigan City, Indiana, to pre-electronic school, and with it was a cooks and bakers school, and we ate good. We tested all the baking that they made. Across the street, we stayed at a Naval Armory in Michigan City, Indiana, and across the street from the Armory was Smith Brothers cough drop factory. All girls. And they used to come in early, stand by the windows, and you could look down and see us getting up, taking a shower. All the girls used to come in early. And I remember the day we came into the Armory, we had to see the doctor, and the doctor said that there was a lot of venereal disease in the city, and don't do anything on your first date. Come in here and look in my book and check the girl's name in the book. And I think there was every girl's name in town was in his book. But anyway, we had a good time in Michigan City, and it was good. It was only a 6 weeks stint there. Then we went to Grove City College, took an engineering course. The course was quite comprehensive.
Now, whereabouts was that?
That's in Pennsylvania, Grove City, Pennsylvania. And it was a private, actually Christian, I think it was a Methodist school. Anyway, you had Saturday afternoon and Sunday off. The rest of the time you did about a 12-hour class. It was a very concentrated course. And then Sundays, if you wanted a date, you had to go to church. That's the only way you could get a date. But it was a very nice town, very nice little town. So we stayed there about 6 or 7 months, and then we went to Naval Research Lab, where we studied all the latest radar and LORAN and navigational equipment. Then we went out to sea.
So you were assigned to the San Diego, that was your first ship?
Yeah, I got on the troop ship. We were an outgoing unit in Shoemaker, California. And from there we left San Francisco on a troop ship. And I don't know why I remember these names. I can't remember what I ate yesterday, but I remember the name was General C.H. Muir was the name of was an Army troop ship. And it was crowded. I mean, there was no place. We slept on the deck. There was there was thousands of guys. Mostly were Marines. And we got to Honolulu, and some of them left, and we picked up some other people. It was still crowded, and we finally ended up in a place called Eniwetok. And in Eniwetok, there was 4 of us got on the ship, and by a motor whaleboat. Motor whaleboat was a very, very good, serviceable ship, but it looked terrible. It was like a big rowboat with a canvas cover on it, like you have in the wagon wheel covers, and it took us to San Diego. And I remember that day very well. We were saluted, went aboard the ODF. First question if we had eaten, and it was great. I mean, no long lines. We went down to mess hall, had our coffee, and anytime you wanted coffee or you wanted a sandwich, it was a completely different atmosphere than I've had up to that point.
So what was your assignment on the San Diego?
I was electronic tech, actually was a radar tech, RT, second class. I was second class, petty officer second class.
So you did repair work on the equipment?
Oh yes, oh yes. Matter of fact, when I met the captain, and I remember his name, Captain Mullins, he was an Irishman. He was buddies with Admiral Halsey. They were buddies. And first thing he said to me, Hans, he says, "You're Jesus Christ our Savior," because some of the radar equipment didn't work. And I came from the Naval Research Lab, so I was the savior. And we did get some of it working, and told him I needed some help, so he said, pick out any 2 men you want to help you, which I did. And I picked up 2 young guys. I remember one guy's name was Elderkin. His last name was Elderkin. And they knew nothing about electronics, and it was fine. I didn't want anybody that knew anything. You train them yourself. And so we got some of the radar equipment working, and the kids were very good. They were seamen first class. In the Navy, like in the Army, you're a buck private. In the Navy, that's not so. You're a PFC equivalent. When you graduate from boot camp, you're seaman first class. Well, these guys were seaman first class. They were deckhands. And they were very eager, and they stayed up half of the night going through the manuals. You know, you unfold these manuals, you end up with 6 feet of wiring diagrams. One of the problems was that the remote PPIs, the remote radar units, like one in a bridge and one somewhere else, I think we had 3 or 4 of them. None of them worked. The main radar equipment did work. The air search had very poor range, and I managed to fix that, increase the range.
Now, did you have plenty of parts to do the
We had
repair?
good spare parts, yeah. We did have good spare parts. The problem was this one kid, well, actually both of them, stayed up one night tracing I asked them to check the wiring. So they traced all the wires and they checked all the diagrams. And in the middle of the night, one night, when they woke me up, he says, you know, there's a termination resistor missing on the coaxial cable of each unit. They had, unbeknown to us, they did some rewiring. And so I looked at it, and sure enough, replaced the resistors, and they all worked. And so I went to Lieutenant Sayers, who was in charge of communications. And he was a very interesting fellow. He was a regular Navy, chief in a regular Navy. And I never knew this, but he made him a provisional reserve lieutenant. So he had a rank, he had a reserve rating of lieutenant. And he told me, he says, I know nothing. He was a radio man. So he said, I know nothing about electronics or radar equipment. He says, I have to believe what you tell me. And so after these 2 guys did this, I went to Lieutenant Sayers and I said, you know, I like to give him a better rate. Well, going from seaman first class to petty officer, there's a lot of, you have to take examinations. And he says, Hans, I don't know anything. You make up the examinations. So I did, and they became petty officers.
Now, what rank were you at that point?
I was 2nd class. And they were petty officer 3rd class. But that's quite a, you have to take an examination and everything, and captain has to prove it and everything. You know, it's a lot of rigmarole. And we finally did that. And these kids worked their ass off. And I mean, they'd do anything we wanted to do.
And then what happened next?
Well, what happened next, the first thing, I think the worst thing that ever happened aboard the USS San Diego was when we hit a typhoon. I mean, we were in some battles, but that typhoon was the worst thing that I've ever been through. I mean, it was a real scary thing. I don't know what the problem was, but we were in 3rd Task Force, but Halsey was our commander. I don't know what happened, but something about the typhoon was coming from the north, and we were heading to west, and somehow typhoon was west. So we were right in. We lost some ships, and we lost some aircraft decks, and it was quite horrible. And of course, being a radar tech, your station was CIC, which is Combat Information Center. And the worst thing about that is you know everything that's going on. You're better off not knowing everything that's going on.
Now, whereabouts was that on the ship?
That was behind the bridge. Behind the bridge. Actually behind and below the bridge. And that's where all the radar equipment was. That's where all the communications equipment was. That's where all the navigator plotted all the everything, and you can get ranges and bearings. That's for all the, well, Combat Information Center, that's what it
The
was,
brain
CIC,
center.
the brain
That's it.
center, yeah.
How long was the typhoon in duration, do you remember?
Well, it was a couple days. I remember what the captain did, what old Mullins, Captain Mullins did, was that we would change position, we would change course and watch the barometer. And the minute there was the slightest indication that damn barometer would go up, we'd head that direction. That's how we got out of the typhoon. And we had, I don't know what the gauge was. You had a gauge, it was like a pendulum that would swing as the ship would roll. And if it rolled up more, if it hit the 40-degree mark, we would roll over. These ships were top heavy. And we were about 37, 38 degrees, if I remember correctly. We were very, very close. And of course, you're sicker than a dog. I mean, you're seasick. I was rarely seasick, but I was sick that day. And I remember one thing, I hated cheese. And when you're under a situation like that, you don't serve meals. They happen to serve some sandwiches. And they had cheese sandwiches, and I ate cheese sandwiches. And I eat cheese now.
Now, where was this when you were struck? Do you recall?
I think it was either Okinawa or going to Philippines.
Yeah, there was one great typhoon everyone
Yeah.
talks about near Okinawa.
Yeah, and it was terrible. And it wasn't, you know, I wasn't aboard ship maybe 3-4 weeks when this happened.
Was there much damage to your ship?
No, we were good. We were all right. But there were, you know, they used to have these what they called converted carriers. They'd build a ship and then they put a deck on it. And a couple of them, the deck blew off or crumpled, or there was some damage to some ships. And I remember Halsey got held for that. Halsey was who was the radical guy in the army? Who was the gung ho guy in the army? Halsey was
in
his,
Europe. Was
yeah.
Patton.
Patton. Well, Halsey was the Patton of the Navy. You know, he was very aggressive type. And then Nimitz was, I think Nimitz was the 5th Fleet and Halsey was the 3rd. I might have this wrong, but Nimitz was more reserved. Nimitz was a strategist. And Halsey was a gung go get 'em, you know, type.
What battles were you involved in?
Well, I was in Okinawa, and the worst battle I was in was Leyte in the Philippines.
Oh, Leyte Gulf.
Leyte Gulf, yeah. And that was one time in my life where I thought I was going to die. I was in CIC and Kamakzee come down. And I heard some other ship, I don't know which ship it was, it says Yearling, Yearling, that was our code name. Yearling was a novel at that time about a horse, if I remember correctly. But that was our code name, Yearling, and he said, Yearling, Yearling, bogey, deadhead diving, good luck. And he was coming straight down, and of course our gunners couldn't get the guns up. Everybody else was shooting at him. And I did something foolish. I ran out of the CIC in a back boat deck to see what was going on. And that guy came so close, I could see the pilot. I mean, this is unbelievable. I could see the pilot. I closed my eyes, and I just assumed I was dead. And I heard a big explosion, and I opened my eyes, and he had missed us, and he missed a carrier, which we were alongside. The carrier was the Bonham Richard, was the carrier's name. And he hit the drink between us and exploded. And I still, for minutes, I couldn't figure out where I was. I couldn't figure if I was dead or alive or what. I mean, I was totally confused. And it's hard to explain when you think, when you see an event that you think you're going to die. I mean, you know, it's incomprehensible. I'm not a religious person, but I did pray at that time. That, and I think the Typhoon was about the worst situations I went through. The kamikazes, of course, you know, they're not any different than we have today. I mean, they were suicide.
Right.
And I think we shot down our ship, I should say the gunners, and I praise those guys. I mean, we shot down about 12, 13 planes. Those gunners were terrific. Now, out of 4 ships, there was 4 ships, identical ships, and I can't name them all. I know that Atlanta was one, Juneau was another. That's where the 5 Sullivan brothers perished, and we were the only one left. So when I came aboard, they said, you know, you're entering the lucky day go. He says, but our luck is not going to last. He says, you know, I mean, that was the attitude at the time. But we did. That was a fabulous ship. It was a light cruiser, and a ship. The cruisers was to protect air cover for the carriers. What would happen when we went on a bombing run? The Japs would follow the planes back, and that's when the action started. When we were retrieving our planes. We were the air cover for the carriers, and we had tremendous amount of firepower.
Now you said that you thought the GE air search was the worst equipment.
That was
in
the worst
ships?
piece of equipment. Yeah, I shouldn't say that because I worked for GE. But yeah, it was. You had to jiggle the thing out of the cabinet, and all the wires were on screw terminals, and the other equipment like Raytheon was the air search, the surface search, and you had Western Electric, which is a fire control. They all had this big A and N connectors. I don't know, if you know what A and N, but it's a cable you plug in and you tighten the ring around it, you clamp it in place.
It's like a cannon plug.
Yeah, very similar. But GE, all the wires with screw terminals. And of course, the air search had the big antenna, and the reason it had the big antenna, they used to call it a bed spring antenna. And the reason it had this large antenna is because the frequency was the lowest. Frequency ran about 300 megahertz, which is very low for radar equipment, but you had a tremendous range. I mean, we could have 60, 70 mile aircraft range picking up aircraft. And where the surface search was 60 miles, maybe 50 miles. And of course the fire control is even worse, less than that. But that was my job, to maintain that equipment. And the worst, well, I shouldn't say the worst. I have one letter of accommodation in my record. And accommodation states that I volunteered to go up the 60-foot mast and replace a slewing motor that crapped out because the antenna wouldn't turn. And all I remember is the captain, we were on our way to Sagami 1 on a bombing run, and the air search radar conked out. The antenna wouldn't turn. Well, I figured out pretty quickly that the motor was something wrong with the motor. So we did have a spare motor. And I remember my Captain Mullins saying, well, get your ass up there and get to replace that motor. And so I got a letter of accommodation that I volunteered to do this. I mean, he was a great guy, but we went up there and I had a couple of bosun's black and tackle. We unbolted the motor, put a new one up, and when I came down, I was sick for 2 days, sick. I didn't realize how far that damn mast swings up there. I was really sick, and I was very rarely seasick, but I was seasick for about 2 days. But anyway, that was my biggest contributions. You know, I didn't have the experience that the Marines had ashore, which were rough. I mean, I think I had good duty in the Navy, but, I think I contributed something to it.
Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt?
Yeah, I think it must have been somewhere going toward the Philippines. And it was pretty sad because nobody knew who Truman was. Truman, who's he? Nobody knew anything about him. And Roosevelt, he was a staunch president for all these years. It's interesting. I just heard on the radio about World War II memorial in Washington, where was written somewhere about Roosevelt's speech, that this infamy and this about the first speech he made after the Pearl Harbor attack. Well, they left out the last few words, "So help us God." Did you know that?
No, I didn't know they left it off.
I heard that on the radio, and I think that's sad, our attitude today. I really disappointed in that.
Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about the dropping the atomic bombs?
Yes. We were in Leyte. We were in the Philippines after Philippines were secured. And that's another story. Let me just backtrack a little bit. Roosevelt wanted to bypass the Philippines and invade Japan. MacArthur convinced him it was politically better to secure going to the Philippines first. Of course, I think he said he was going to come back to the Philippines, but for all his people at what was the name of the place where they had where he left? Where he left Philippines originally.
Busan?
Yeah, Bataan.
Oh, Bataan, okay.
Yeah. And so that's why we ended up in the Philippines. And after Philippines were secured, we were within 2 weeks of invading Japan. All the ships were being assembled. They had ships coming back from Europe and troops and everything. And that's a very interesting story because the girl I married, her father was a merchant marine sea captain for about 50 years. His ship was there. Could have been right alongside us. Of course, I didn't know him at the time. I didn't get married till after the war. And I didn't find this out till my brother-in-law researched where his ship was. And we found out the ship was in the Philippines, Leyte, just prior to the invasion of Japan. So it was sort of interesting. Of course, he was a rough sea captain too, so my Navy experience didn't count worth a damn, according to him. But yes, and I have very mixed a feeling about the atom bomb. I'll tell you why. Because I think there would have been tremendous casualties. And I say this because the ship I was on, USS San Diego, was the first ship in Tokyo Harbor after the Japanese surrender. And we came in, we were the first ship came in, and we were graciously invaded by the media. At that time it was radio. And I'll never forget the stories they put out where they had to make up stories because nothing was going on as we were going into Tokyo Harbor, Tokyo Bay. We had took on a Japanese pilot, and everything was marked with white flags where they were supposed to, but the media made up a story you couldn't believe. Like, if you listened to what they were saying, that the war was going to start all over again. And I always remember that when I hear a story today. we docked at Yokosuka, right along a huge crane. And I went ashore there. We had to dismember a radar station. And went ashore there, and there was a bronze plaque on this crane that says, "Made by Bethlehem Steel." I always remember that. And while we were there, we had the visitation of General MacArthur. And we had an exec officer, and I will say that there was always a little, disparity, or whatever you want to call it, between the Navy and the Army. And General MacArthur, he was with his fancy hat, his big pipe and everything. He suggested he was going to come aboard, use us as a gangway to Yokosuka, just walk around a little bit. And I remember our exec officers wanted to have an honor guard in dress blues. And our captain vetoed it. He says, "No, we'll pipe him aboard as respect, but he's not going to have an honor guard." So he didn't have an honor guard. Well, I was on deck at the time, and I remember him coming along, and he did not want to have a motor whaleboat. So he got the launch from the King George V, which was a British warship. I think it was King George V or VI or something, I don't know. But anyway, it was a British warship out there. And they had this beautiful launch with the British sailors with their white shorts, and they maneuvered their, I guess their hooks, And he came aboard, and he walked across, and came down the gangway. We piped him aboard, and he walked around Yokosuka. And Yokosuka had hundreds and hundreds in different manufacturing stages of boats, about 30, 40 feet, speedboats, where the bow was the warhead. These were going to be suicide speedboats if the Navy came in the harbor. And so again, I say with there's been a lot of discussion about the atom bombs that killed a lot of people. Shouldn't we dropped it, or shouldn't we? And of course, the people today are, they don't realize what it was during that time. I think he saved a lot of American lives. And he ended the war. So I give Truman credit for that. Incidentally, I visited his museum, and it's nothing like the museums that Clinton or any of these other guys have. It's a little two-family house, and you have a cardboard statue of him greeting you. And he has a movie where he fired MacArthur. And the movie is where, MacArthur was circling because he wanted to land last and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they had a pretty big ego, as I remember. But anyway, that's some of the memorial memories that I have of.
Now, how long were you in Japan?
We were only about 3-4 days.
Mm-hmm.
Then we headed home. We had the most service out there, and we headed home. And that's another little story. We were going about 8-9 knots, and we were all alone going back to the United States. And you travel a great circle route, and it's about 25-30 day trip, because you're not going fast, because you have to be, you have to maintain the fuel consumption. And we were supposed to meet a fueling group the following day. We were out one day, the next day we were supposed to meet a fueling group. And I got into a controversy between the captain and Commander Wormser, who was a navigator. I was up in CIC. Nobody was there in CIC. It was after the war. There was no combat going in or anything. So anyway, I think I was working on a radar or something. No, I was working on the Loran equipment. That's another story. But anyway, I hear this voice message come over. Yearling, yearling, this is ComSat something, And so I took the message, and I was not supposed to take the message. I'm not a radio man. So anyway, it wasn't in code, so the radio room down below didn't receive the message. So I wrote the message down. Anyway, the message was there's a change of rendezvous location of the fielding group for the following day. So I wrote the message down, I put it in a slot down into the radio room, and it finally got to the Commander Wormser, who was our navigator, and he stormed up. He says, "This is impossible." And he questioned, who took this damn message? So now I was on the line. But anyway, and then shortly after, the captain came in, and he got the message. He says, why the hell are we going this direction? We're going to miss the fielding group. And the fielding group, so they have a big argument about where this damn fielding group is. Finally, the captain says to me, "Are you sure you took the right message?" I said, "Yeah, I wrote it down the way I heard it." Okay, so he told Wormser, change the course, meet the fielding group. Well, I couldn't sleep all night. The first thing at sun up, I was out there looking for the fielding group. Fortunately, they were there. But that was another little conflict there that I remember. But we came back to the States, and we had a wonderful time. And we were greeted. We came back in Frisco. We had fireboats meeting us, and of course we had crews that had been on that ship a lot longer than I have, so I was not in the First Liberty group. But I don't know why I remember all these things. As I said, I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Now, were you discharged shortly thereafter?
Well, I was just, we went to Everett. Actually, we went out to sea again. We picked up troops in a place called Espiritu Santos and took them to Australia. They were Australian troops. There was a big thing going on, getting troops, getting troops back to we had Australian troops and British and you name it. So we took these Australian troops back to Australia, and Espiritu Santos is about maybe 1,000 miles from Australia, northeast of Australia. I'm guessing now, I don't have it. But anyway, we took them, we picked up these troops. By the time we got there, we were all fresh vegetables. Everything we had was canned and dehydrated, and we were bitching and moaning about that. We picked up these troops, and they thought they were in heaven when we fed them. So everything was relative, We took them to Australia, and on the way there, we crossed the equator. I had never crossed the equator. So we went to that ceremony. And I remember when we dumped me back in a drink on a chair, they dumped me back. I watched the guy in front of me, and they kept saying, "Well, what are you now? What are you now?" And he didn't know. They dunked him again till he figured out he was a shellback. And then they let him go. So when they dunked me, I came up screaming, "A shellback, I'm a shellback." They said, "We haven't asked you yet." But that was quite an experience too, so that was all right.
You still have your card?
I don't know where it is. I don't know where it is. Actually, we had a big certificate. But that was a Navy tradition. They slow the ship down and make sure you cross at noon, I guess it was, or something. It was an old Navy tradition. Matter of fact, my wife is Norwegian, and the Norwegians have akavit, which is a drink. It's like vodka, but it's even worse than vodka. But that drink has to cross the equator, and if you look through the bottle in the back, the label is dated, and the position of where you cross the equator, and then it's brought back, and that's a traditional thing the Norwegians have. It's called akavit. The Danes have akavit too, but Norwegians, that's the way they do it.
Now, when were you finally discharged?
I was discharged in '46, and I put the I was on a ship till they put it in mothballs up in Everett, Washington. And that's another little interesting story. I never played poker. And they finally conned me, and we used to play hearts. That was because we had a bunch of Southerners aboard ships. That was their card game. And so they conned me into playing poker, and I won like 60, 70 bucks. And a bus was beeping out there, take me to the Everett Discharge Center. And so I ended up with 60 or 70 bucks in my pocket. I had to leave the game. And that's another interesting story is that, and this is a fellow I've been trying to find and find. He was a very dear friend of mine. Name was Swanson. He was a Swede. And he was the yeoman. The yeoman is like the secretary of the commanding officer. And he got me a pass. Since I didn't have a watch, he says, Keller, he says, why don't you, I'll get you a free gangway pass. So when we're in port, you can go on and off as long as, as long as you come back by the time the ship leaves. And I said, how are you going to do that? He says, well, I make it out, the commander. You don't know. Whatever I give him, he signs, And everybody wanted to know how I got this free gangway pass. So I could go off the ship anytime and come back as long as we were in port. And I could never find the guy. I don't know what happened to him. He never showed up at the reunions. His name was Swanson. And I have one picture of him I'm going to put in my archives. And he also, when I was discharged, he filled out my papers saying that I wanted to be discharged in Bremerton, which is in the state of Washington. He says, otherwise they're going to put you on a train and take you back to Albany. This way, he says, they'll give you a payout and you can fly home. So that's what I did. But everything, has, you learn to be an operator, So that's what happened. I flew back. The plane had trouble, had an oil leak, and had to land in Omaha, Nebraska. We're coming down and down over the Rocky Mountains. I had my ruptured duck, and I said, oh, here, all through the war, now the damn plane's going to crash. But it landed in Omaha, wouldn't take off again, so we took a Burlington Streamliner. They added a car onto us, this whole crew on this plane. What was the name? It was a 4-engine plane, Conrail, or something like that. It was a big plane. Anyway, the trip took something like 12 hours from coast to coast. I made some stops and everything. But anyway, took a train to Chicago and then flew home from Chicago. My family was glad to see me.
Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
Yes, I did. I took a couple of courses. But luckily, I had enough credits from Grove City College plus my RPI credits. I got an engineering degree. I went back to GE and got a job at the research lab. And my first job there was working on an analytical mass spectrograph, which was designed for separating U-238 and 232, 38. I mean, a project for the atom bomb. And GE was making a commercial product out of this. And then I had some other project at the research lab. And then in 1968, I left the research lab. And actually about 3 of us left, and we started a new group in the turbine department because GE was going into nuclear turbines. So we were the design group designing control equipment for nuclear turbines. That, before you couldn't go in by the turbine and crank a open a valve, had to be all done by remote control. And ironically, I ended up again visiting Japan a few times. And that was interesting. The Japanese were very gracious, but they would look at me and try to figure out if I was there during the war. And they'd always ask me Keller-san, first trip to Japan, and I always say, no, I was here last year, even if I wasn't. And they wouldn't know how to rephrase the question.
Did you ever use the 5220 Club?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Matter of fact, I went, when I got out of, when I came back to Schenectady, I went to the Labor Department to get a job. And they said, oh, you take it easy, don't worry, you know, just, we'll give you unemployment, you're entitled to unemployment. Well, about a half a week, I just couldn't take it anymore. I went down to GE myself and got my job. I never collected a penny from that.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah, I'm in the VFW, 4660. That's where I got your...
Mm-hmm. Have you been active at all? Or?
Yeah, I'm the adjunct. We're all getting older.
Yeah. I know you've attended reunions.
Yeah, I didn't attend the last 2 or 3 because my wife can't make it anymore. But yeah, they were very memorable. I remember one guy. He was a steward. He was a Puerto Rican. As you know, at that time during the Navy, you didn't have any black. There wasn't any black. This guy was close to black. He was a Puerto Rican. Very nice guy. He was the captain's steward. And I would go to a repair ship when we'd go into Eniwetok or Ulithi and pick up a couple of gallons of pure grain alcohol for cleaning relay contacts. Well, the relay contacts would never see them. I'd pass it around and you put a little in a glass and mix it with orange juice or pineapple juice. Well, this Stuart loved to drink, so I'd always give him a little drink, you know, and give him a little alcohol. So I'd be up like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning working on a damn radar. I'd wake him up and I'd say, I forget what his name is. I'd say to him, hey, fry me a couple eggs, you know. All the eggs we had, the captain had, the only guy had fresh eggs, you know. Everything else was powder. Well, he'd fry me a couple of eggs and bring it down to the mess hall. And he'd always say, oh, if the captain catches me, he'll kill me. Captain will kill me if he catches me. But anyway, at the reunion, he came up to me and he says, you know, you look familiar. He says, I don't remember. And then finally, before we left the reunion, he says, I remember, you're the guy with the alcohol. You're the guy with the alcohol. So, and then it was interesting, the first reunion we went to, there was a father and son. And this is before I got on the ship. But anyway, there was a father and son. I can't remember, my wife could, she had a better name. But anyway, the old man marked the cards and his son would play the cards and they'd always win. and I remember this first reunion you had was in New Jersey. And I remember I was sitting out on the veranda there talking to some of the fellas. And, you know, it was a strange feeling. The people that I really were close to, the 3-4 guys I was really close to, I could never find at the reunion. It was amazing. I did finally find a guy who was a radioman who remembered me. But out of about 600 men, the technicians crew, and of course a lot of them are dead now too. But I lost my train of thought now. Oh yeah, about the card game, the father and son business. And I was amazed that they were both on the ship, but they were there before I entered the ship, got on the ship. And I was sitting there, and this guy, I can't remember his name, but come walking in, and the guy I was sitting with, he says, he's not allowed to this reunion, get him out. And he was very bitter. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was till later, that, you know, he lost some money at a card game. And then there was another funny incident. Was a guy came around and he says, aren't you the dentist? We had a doctor and a dentist aboard. Yeah. He says, well, you know, you'd pulled all my goddamn wrong teeth. And he says, well, what do you expect? I was just right out of school. But anyway, those are a couple of comical situations we had. But otherwise, the reunions were very nice. We had a reunion, and I have a tape of this. We had a reunion in San Diego on the 50th anniversary. in San Diego, which was the name of the ship. And we had a 20-band, Navy band serenades at our dinner. We had 3 admirals come up, shake everybody's hand. It was beautiful. And I have a picture of shaking hands with an admiral. And I asked him, I said, you know, this is the closest I ever got to an admiral. And he said, it's great, isn't it?
How do you think your time in the service changed or had an effect on your life?
Well, I've been in electronics all my life.
Mhm.
And so, of course, you know, I've gone into computers and all kinds of electronic equipment, instrumentation, and I love it. And I guess maybe that's a reflection from my Navy training. And in the Navy, you know, I felt that there was a lot of guys that had rougher times in their service, and I often wonder that whether I did my share or not, you know, but I think I did.
Okay.
Now you said you had some photographs.
Yeah, I have a picture, and I made some copies for you.
Okay.
This is the ship, this is the surrender of the Japanese on the Missouri. I don't know if you can see it.
Yep.
Oh yeah, you can focus right in. Now, were you in the harbor when the surrender took place?
Yeah, we left the following day.
Okay, got it.
And this is the ship when we were in Yokosuka.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Major copy. Now I have some. You can't probably see this, but they had a sunset salute to us in San Diego. They had all the boots salute us in San Diego, marching and salute us.
This was for the 50th anniversary?
Yeah, October 5th, 1995. And here you can make a copy of this. This is some of the record of the San Diego.
Okay.
And
Now, do you have a picture of yourself?
yeah, I got a picture of myself. I made one for you if you want it, of myself then and now.
Okay, that'd be great.
Here is now.
Okay.
And here is then.
Now, do you remember where and when that was taken?
No.
Okay.
You could probably in basic, most of them were. Well, actually, you got some ribbons.
No, I got
there,
some ribbon. This was after.
Yeah,
I think this is after we came back.
Okay, thank you.
And there's another one you can have. Made a copy. You can make a copy of anything you want here. And here's a ditty somebody sent me about a typical screw-up when Roosevelt was on a ship going to Malta. You can have that.
Thank you.
Okay, is that everything?
Well, you can look at this here. I don't know. Probably nothing here. Yeah, here's something that's very nice. My name is on a memorial in the city of San Diego, the memorial of the ship. You can make a copy of this too if you want.
Sure.
And that was very nice. Group got together.
Okay.
And this is a private invitation I had. I didn't make it at the time, but so
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
thank you.